Hey guys, Zane from the Infinite Jukebox here with another album review, and today I wanted to talk about the new Demoniac record, Nube Negra. This album's in Spanish, so if I pronounce things horribly wrong, I apologize. Please bear with me. Ask any given metalhead for an example of great modern metal coming out of South America right now, and chances are the conversation will eventually get to Demoniac. I mean, they aren't the biggest or most household name level band in the world, far from it actually, but nonetheless, they've gotten a lot of praise from some circles within the genre. I wouldn't call them powerhouses in metal right now or anything like that, not even within South American countries alone, but at the same time, 2020's So It Goes was a pretty major release in its given year, and considering in metal alone that year you had releases from bands ranging from Imperial Triumphant and Boris to Deftones and Loathe, seeing a band from Chile manage to kind of make a huge breakthrough within the genre's underground at the very least was kind of a great thing to see. Of course, the band existed well before that, and at this point they've been honing their craft for over a decade, and that's pretty easy to see here, because with 3 years now having passed since their last studio album, Nube Negra is a perfect example of how everything can be worth the wait after a fairly long period between albums, how a band who is consistently underestimated and underappreciated can by far release one of the best albums of a given genre in any given year, and more than anything, just why Demoniac are an awesome band. The record immediately starts out with this oppressive yet enticing atmosphere as Nube Negra kind of provides the listener with a moody, stormy ambience that I personally really enjoy. I think it sets up a lot of great things for the record, and the usage of natural ambience in that particular passage of the opening track is especially intriguing, seeing as how it's this sort of calm before the storm, if you will. It manages to provide a lot to the overall development of the record. It doesn't fall flat or anything like that, and provides an excellent preface for the ferocity that is yet to come at that point. And atmosphere is something that Demoniac consistently follow up on throughout the rest of this record. I mean, even in the album's most aggressive moments, there's this sort of grinding intensity that you can find in every single riff and every single cut on the album that just feels especially powerful, and that's something that can be partially attributed to some of the more ambient-focused moments, which I will touch on later, or perhaps more so, it could be heavily attributed towards the bleak coldness of a lot of the black metal influences found here. I mean, hey, some of the most popular black metal bands of all time are European, sure, but at the same time, there's no denying that a lot of the genre's roots do stem from South American metal. The blunt coldness and in turn rawness of traditional black metal sounds and influences can easily be heavily overused. In fact, that's why I would argue that some of the earliest examples of black metal don't necessarily hold up the best in comparison to future releases within the genre, but those particular sounds are perfectly incorporated here throughout the entirety of Nube Negra. I personally feel that a lot of the atmosphere here is consistently kept. It's consistently able to come across as cold and brutal and unrelenting, yet at the same time there's this sort of striking naturalness about it, though at the same time you could also say that that is something to be attributed towards the acoustic guitar passages on tracks like Granada, for example. My point is that behind a thick wall of heavy production, technical ability, and generally confrontational sounding instrumentals, there is something to be heavily appreciated here in terms of just tone. Thrash metal in general is a genre that can definitely be heavily overproduced, as a number of classic thrash bands have proven as they've entered their later years, and Nube Negra could have easily fallen into that trap if I'm being totally honest, but at the same time, it doesn't manage to become this overproduced thrash attack. It manages to have a huge amount of punch behind it, and just a touch of hopelessness that makes it this intriguing and highly distinct album. I mean, the stark feel here that never really becomes depressive or anything like that, it's just absolutely perfect, and I think it's the best possible artistic direction that Demoniac could have really gone in. And that isn't even to mention the actual instrumental abilities of the band, something that once again is heavily underrated in my eyes, and also something that they beautifully demonstrate throughout the entirety of this record. The intensity of the riffs here are absolutely cranked to the max, as Nube Negra's general guitar tone is just so raw and unfiltered in the best way that it possibly could be. But at the same time, the melodies of a lot of tracks, despite maybe not being the most obvious upon first listen, are definitely something that helps keep the record grounded. They are executed perfectly, and it prevents the band from just sounding like they're thrashing out for the sake of thrashing out. It's something that a lot of bands just end up doing, and thankfully Demoniac avoid that trope. I mean, really, seeing as thrash metal and black metal, arguably the two most popular subgenres of metal known for being incredibly raw, are the bass elements here? It could have been a disaster. It really could have been just a genuinely bad, underproduced, overly raw record, and you know what, in the end it's not. It's a pretty perfectly executed listen. The bass can also be extremely punchy as well. The drums can quickly slide between highly impressive fills and devastating blast beats without a pitch, and the guitar solos are absolutely phenomenal, especially on moments such as the climactic moment of the album closer track El Final, which I feel ultimately really defines that song in particular. But in general, the guitar solos here tend to be executed wildly, but with enough compositional and technical standard that they still feel very impressive to any listener who's looking for something a little more on, again, the technical side. Calling Demoniac a virtuosic band would be a bold and also wildly incorrect statement, if I'm being completely honest. I mean, the band are not flawless per se in terms of actual ability, but at the same time, this is a pretty flawless execution of what they can do. They've obviously built up a lot of musical chops as the years have gone on, and that is absolutely demonstrated here on Nube Negra. I really do feel like they are underappreciated from a musical and compositional standpoint within a lot of metal circles, and if this record can't prove them, then I don't know what can. In the end, however, I feel like Demoniac truly stands out from all of their thrash metal and thrash black metal crossover peers, just via the little things. There are so many minor details in this album that are so easy to ignore upon first or even second listen, and so easy to find initially unimportant, that ultimately add up into details for this bigger picture that slowly reveals itself as the record goes on. As previously mentioned, some of the more mellow passages really do add to the atmosphere of the record as a whole and allow for very pleasant, albeit appropriately rare breaks throughout the entirety of the record. Meanwhile, you have moments such as the back half of the track Lakaida, where you have these anthemic vocals and this intense, relentless riffage that I feel really gives a powerful statement during the climax of that song, ultimately giving that track a major definition. It really makes it stand out in the track list. And again, there's those melodies I mentioned that, again, while definitely hidden under a lot of ferocity, are certainly still there, and ultimately add a sense of urgency to already excellent songs, making them stand out all the more. The use of stereotypically non-metal instruments as well, like the accordion and the flute, which are both featured here at separate points on the record, could also be sort of packaged into the same category of odd things that work better than they probably should. And, I mean, really, their occasional appearances do give this sort of unique flair to the record that I ultimately think is great. It really makes Nube Negra stand out as this excellent album that has a lot to say creatively, much more than your average thrash record. Upon brief glance, one could easily pass off Nube Negra as this sort of basic thrash album with some prog and black metal leanings, and if you're not really familiar, that's a combination that's less common than you might think. And you know what, that's understandable. As much as I am a fan of thrash and black metal, they are both genres that have a lot of wildly mediocre stuff within them. I mean, sure, every genre does, but it really does seem like thrash and black metal in particular have a huge amount of stuff within them, whether it's iconic or not, that just feels so basic and so familiar if you've listened to the big iconic records within those given genres. And you know what? One certainly could consider Nube Negra that to an extent, somewhat basic, but that's only if you're really taking an initial glance at the album, because after spending a fair amount of time with it, the secrets woven within this album begin to reveal themselves. All of these subtle, very minor creative decisions and all of these different artistic rises and falls throughout, I think that they all work beautifully, and they make for a listening experience that is not only distinct from your average metal album and one of the most distinct metal albums that you'll probably hear all year, but also an album that's just hugely worth returning to. I mean, again, there are a lot of albums within the realm of thrash and black metal that are good, but not really good enough to return to in comparison to the stone hard classics. But you know what? I think that this could potentially be a modern classic, because it really does stand out that much. Again, it's not a perfect album, but it's damn unique. I digress. The point I'm trying to make here is that throughout the entirety of Nube Negra, a lot of minor details begin to show themselves more clearly, and ultimately that highlights why Demoniac do what they do so incredibly well, and why they absolutely deserve the relative popularity that they've been facing over the course of the past few years. Like I said at the beginning of this review, Demoniac are far from being household names. That being said, they have understandably made a decently sized splash within the realm of some metal circles. Not all, but some. For those paying attention, you will see that the Chileans here have really provided a highly unique take on thrash metal that manages to combine influences from a variety of other corners of metal to create something that is very self-defined and something that has a huge amount of self-determined identity. For those that don't have Demoniac within their focus, which is completely understandable considering, again, they aren't the biggest band in the world, I feel like you may very well be missing out on one of the great thrash metal bands of our time, or at very least the past couple of years. I'm going to give this record 4 stars out of 5. Now that being said, that's the end of this album review. I've been Zane from the Infinite Jukebox. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.